Good afternoon, everybody. So today we have the Samvad talk in the theme called Technology for Multi-omics Data Analysis, and we have a guest speaker today. So the speaker is Professor Arijit Samal from Institute of Mathematical Studies, Sciences in Chennai. And he has been working in the area of computational biology. So, just to briefly introduce Arijit Samal, he is a faculty member in the Computational Biology Group of IMSC Chennai since April 2014. He obtained his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in physics from University of Delhi, and thereafter did his postdoctoral training from MPI MIS Leipzig, CNRS LPTMS Orsay, ISB Seattle, and ICTP Trieste. uh, yeah, four places. His primary research interests are in the area of network science and computational systems biology. And a lot of his papers have a good blend of computer science and biology. So today he's going to talk about the minimum complexity drives regulatory logic in Boolean models of living systems. So this is a paper that he and his lab, AS Lab in IMSC have published on bioRxiv for now. They have a preprint. So Arijit will be discussing this paper here. So without much ado, I'd like to invite Arijit to take over. Thank you, Arijit, for coming.
So thank you very much. Let me start by thanking Jaya for the invitation and the opportunity to present our work today. So this is a new piece of work that we have recently done. Recently completed, and only a preprint is available currently in bioRxiv, as Jaya mentioned. So the work that I'm going to present is sort of at the interface of computational systems biology and concepts in computer science. Um, I hope that I'm able to convey the main message in the talk, because there is a lot of theoretical background which might be needed to understand the work. So I try to tell you the key concepts um, in the work and convey the main message if possible. I also want to again re-emphasize that this is fresh off the oven, and I have hardly presented ever this work, so there will be rough edges when I give the talk today. And any feedback you may give me later on, because it needs to be somehow tuned over time for an interdisciplinary audience. But there is a lot of material from computer science one needs to know to understand the framework and the results that we have obtained. So, those of you who are not familiar with math science or the Institute of Mathematical Sciences, just a brief overview from where I am located. So, math science has been an institute for almost 60 years now. We are going to celebrate our 60 years in January 3rd, 2022 is when we complete our 60 years. It's a basic theoretical research institute in mathematical and physical sciences. There are 4 research areas or groups, or if you want to call it departments, with 50 plus faculty members. The largest group is physics, then math, then there's a group of theoretical computer science, and the newest group of computational biology, which has been there since 2013, of which I am a member. We are a research institute, so we are only engaged in training PhD students and postdocs. We don't have bachelor's and master's students as such. We have integrated PhD students, but we don't have any bachelor's and master's students. MathScience happens to be an autonomous institute of DAE, and it's a constituent institution of the Homi Bhabha National Institute, or HPNI, that grants degrees to our students. So we are located in Chennai. If you see in the educational and IIT hub, we were surrounded by IIT Madras, Anna University, CLRI, CERT here, the Title Park. So we are also surrounded by a lot of activity around here. It's a serene but small campus that we are located. So if you want to be engaged somehow with the computational biology group, the main program that we have is our PhD program in computational biology. It has been started since 2013. Typically, the deadline for applications is March end. We offer 5 to 7 PhD positions every year with fellowship from DAE. the PhD is awarded from the Board of Life Sciences at HPNI. So the nice part about this program is it's highly interdisciplinary. So we are able to take students from any background, that is a master's, MTech, or BTech in any branch of science or engineering. They should have qualified one of these exams, based on which we shortlist the candidates and then we interview them. And if you're selected, you can join the PhD program. We also have an intensive coursework in the ComBio program. So the first year, actually, you take 7 core courses, 2 electives, and 1 project. And at the end of the first year, the students have the right to choose their own advisor among the faculty in the institute. So it's actually the students who choose the advisor. So more information about the PhD program is available on this website. And due to COVID, there are maybe some changes in the deadlines. But also there are other ways to engage with us. We have postdoc positions, we have project assistant positions, we also have a summer research program, we have a visiting program for academics. We do hold international conferences, workshops, and schools in the COVID times in a virtual mode and in usual times in a physical mode. So if you look at my research, before I get to the meat of today's talk, it's broadly divided currently in the last 7 years into these 4 areas. One, which is very biology, the systems modeling of metabolism and protein secretion in microbes. It was funded by Ramanujan Fellowship till recently. Then a second area, which is really close to my heart, which is studying chemical spaces from the perspective of drug discovery, systems toxicology, and human exposome. So this has huge applications. This is a new area which I'm developing in my group for last 5 to 6 years. And then we also do develop a lot of methods for analysis of networks, in particular biological networks, and that's funded by a Max Planck partner group in mathematical biology. So we also help experimental biology groups in analysis of experimental data sets, multi-omic data sets. And that part was funded till recently by the ESSER BST Startup Grant. So this is one representative publication which has come out of it. So this is my email. You're welcome to contact me. More information about our research is available through my webpage. But I would like to advertise that I'm always looking for master students for physical or virtual internships because we don't have them in-house. Typically, I want students for 4 to 6 months at least. And if they are willing to do projects in these areas, most likely we will be able to give a respectable fellowship from an academic perspective to conduct this internship. So one area I would like to advertise, maybe there are some students in IIIT Bangalore who would be interested, is we do develop novel methods for network science. And one particular area where we collaborate a lot with the Max Planck Institute for Mathematics and the Sciences through this partner group is to take measures which have been developed in discrete geometry and sort of port it to networks and see if those measures could be, or methods could be useful in analyzing complex networks. So these are some pieces of work that we have done in the last 5 years, and they have also been covered by the Max Planck Society, as you can see, and also Nature India. See, I am also working with a colleague here, off and on, and these are some publications in the topic of persistent homology, where we develop methods, which are inspired by topology for networks. So I would be in particular very interested in attracting students if there are in IIIT Bangalore for this program. And I have a lot of funding available to support students if they're interested. So with that, let me just get to the topic of today's talk. This work was done by, actually led by my PhD student, Ajay, who is a student at IMSC. He's into his 3rd year now. And we have a collaborator who happens to be my long-term mentor, Olivier Martin, who is the director of research at INRA. So, the work is available as a preprint currently in bioRxiv. So all the details are available there. And actually it has been explained in sufficient detail that anybody can understand. So if you don't understand anything in the talk, it is primarily because I'm giving it perhaps for the first or the second time. There are rough edges. There are a lot of concepts to convey, but if you can go back to the paper and try to understand it. But I hope to convey the main message, at least the essence of what I want to tell today to all of you. So with that, let's try to dive into the topic which I want to cover. So if you look at biology, the cell, and here I show a simple eukaryotic cell, is the basic unit of life. And of course, in most eukaryotes and prokaryotes as well, the central dogma is where you know that the DNA in the genome codes for RNA, maybe messenger RNA, and that gets translated into protein. And proteins are both the building blocks of the cell and drive most functions. So they can act as enzymes, they can act as signaling molecules that could sense environment, or they could be structural components. This central dogma immediately leads to at least three different networks in the cell. So one can actually view the cell as a network of networks. So here I have given a cartoon representation of how you can view the different networks inside a cell. So you have here three genes, okay, gene A, gene B, gene C. I have kept it not biologically exact, but I wanted to just convey the message. They code for three mRNAs, mRNA A, mRNA B, mRNA C. These mRNAs could get translated into proteins, protein A, protein B, protein C. So each of these genes, mRNAs and proteins, you could imagine as nodes in your graph. Of course, there are different types of nodes in your graph. But these proteins, for example, A, B, and C, they could act as enzymes or catalysts for different reactions which occur in the cell. This reaction, which converts metabolite A to B, B to C, and C to D. So there are three reactions which are happening here, and these three proteins could catalyze those reactions. So that would be a protein metabolite interaction. That's one network, which is the metabolic network inside the cell, which is an important topic of investigation for many biologists. Second network could be that the proteins could interact amongst each other and influence each other's activity. That would be the protein-protein interaction network. Also, signaling is sort of a part of that. So also the proteins could act as transcription factors, as I show in the blue arrow, and go and bind to the promoter of a gene and influence its regulation. And that type of a network of transcription factors and genes is basically what forms the gene regulation network. So you can at least imagine three different networks in the cell. There are many more. One is the metabolic network, the second is the protein interaction network, and third is the gene regulation network. And somewhat today's topic will more dwell about gene regulation network. So since a long time, people who are interested in modeling in biology, they have been interested in modeling the dynamics, the structure and dynamics of gene regulatory networks. And one of the earliest frameworks in this direction, which has since gained a lot of attention and also popularity, is the framework of discrete network modeling. So I'm using this word discrete because it may not always be Boolean, but today's talk will be about Boolean. And two people who made important contributions to the area are René Thomas and Stuart Kauffman. So this is a 1969 paper by Stuart Kauffman, and this is a 1973 paper. So they actually proposed the framework of discrete network modeling, Kauffman in particular Boolean network modeling, to do sort of qualitative dynamical modeling of these gene regulatory networks. So, so how do you make sense of a complex network of interacting genes? So actually, Stuart Kauffman, as I mentioned in the previous slide, introduced the Boolean networks in 1969 as a framework to study the dynamics of gene regulatory networks. So in his framework, he considered n genes, capital N, so for the number of genes, and each gene could be a binary device. So each gene has two states, either on or off, that is active or inactive. So the active state is 1, inactive state is 0. Each gene also has k incoming links from k random genes. So, so in the network, one gene controls another gene. So any gene, if you look at, it could be controlled by a few other genes. So in his framework, he assumed that there are k other genes which control a certain gene, and these k are chosen at random. And then the regulation at each gene, how the inputs to a gene control an output gene, that is basically assigned through a random Boolean function out of the 2 to the power 2 to the power k. I'll explain in detail this number 2 to the power 2 to the power k. And furthermore, in his framework, the update of the dynamics of the network was synchronous. I will again explain in the subsequent slide the following. So Stuart Kauffman was, of course, modeling this in 1969, and then data on real networks was not readily available, at least not at the genome scale. So in the absence of data on the structure of gene networks, these people basically modeled the dynamics of gene regulatory networks as random Boolean networks for the major part of the last century, actually, because much of the data, real data, became available towards the end of the previous century. So in the models that Stuart Kauffman studied for a long time, this network structure or the graph was random. Also, the choice of Boolean function, that is the update rule, was also random. So what happened towards the end of the last century and at the dawn of the current century is that both genome sequencing and the availability of big data led to the reconstruction of gene regulatory networks. I don't have time to go into details here, but today we know that the structure of real networks is very different from a random graph. So the network structure, of a particular biological network of interest, could be inferred from experimental data. Further, the update rules or the regulation could also be inferred from experimental data and need not be randomly chosen. So again, recall, for a large part of the last century, Boolean network modeling was done by assuming both a random network structure and a random choice of Boolean function. But now the data from experiments makes it possible to infer both the structure of the network and possibly also the update rule or the Boolean function assigned to each node in the graph. Further, you could also infer steady-state attractors reflecting cell states, which can be also obtained from experimental data. So this is not very important for today's talk, but very important for Boolean modeling. My talk today will really focus on the update rules, the type of update rules that exist in real systems, vis-a-vis possibly a random choice. So this raises the question whether Boolean functions derived from experimental data are random. So was it correct to model for a large part of the last century by assigning Boolean functions at random to each node in the graph? So let me just try to give a background to Boolean network modeling through this slide. So let's take just a simple network. Here you have three nodes. You have three nodes, V1, V2, and V3. And the network is directed. So V2 influence V1, V1 influence V2, V3 influence V2, V2 also influence V3. But V1 influence V3, but V3 doesn't influence back V1, if you can see. So you have the nodes and the edges. The edges are directed. So, and you can write the state of each node. So each node is in one of the two states because it's a Boolean. Okay, so it is either 1 or 0. So 1 is active or on, 0 is inactive or off. Subsequently, you can write the dynamical system as follows. So if you look at V1, it is influenced by V2 only. Okay, there is no link from V3. So the state of V1 depends on state of V2. But as I said, the update is synchronous and time is taken as discrete in this framework. The state at t+1 is dependent on state at time t of the node which regulates the gene. Similarly, you could see that you could write the equation or an update rule for each of the other nodes. Here V2 is dependent on both V1 and V3. So you write a update rule like this. So these are Boolean functions which can be represented as truth table, as I will convey in the next few slides. So this leads to a state transition graph. That is, if at time t you assign the state 1 to this one, 0 to this one, and 1 to this, then at time t+1, these dynamical equations, if I say so, these are discrete dynamical equations, tell you which is the state it will flow to. And actually it flows to the following state. And you can figure out the state space of this network. Okay, there are 8 states because you have 2 into 2 into 2. So as you can see there is a state transition graph which is given. So in this state transition graph, what you can see is that if you are in the state 0, 0, 0, you remain in that state. If you're in the state 1, 1, 0, you remain in that state. If you are in the state 0, 1, 1 or 1, 0, 0, you will go to the state 0, 1, 1 and this one to back to 1, 0, 0. So this is kind of a two cycle. So these are attractors, steady state attractors. This is a two step. This is a two cycle. Okay, so you can actually have qualitative dynamics with this Boolean dynamical system. What I am concerned about is these rules that are, that could be inferred from real data for each of the genes. So let me try to tell you something before I go on. So one of the important messages I want to give away is that when you look at a real network, so if you think about humans, there are 20,000 or 25,000 genes. So it is very easy to have one gene controlled by, let's say, 5 other genes. But if one gene is controlled by 5 other genes, so then the Boolean function will depend on at least 5 genes. Okay, here. So what I wanted to say is that as the number of inputs k to a Boolean function increases, the number of possible functions explode. So all of you are aware, I mean, I don't need to tell you, so you are aware of what a Boolean function is. You have certain inputs which are Boolean variables. I have denoted them from x1 to x2 to xk. Each can take values 0 or 1, and then the output of the Boolean function is some fx. Okay, so these the values of x1s can define the vector x, which is one row in the truth table, and the output of that truth table is the fx. So you can convince yourself that the number of possible input vectors with k inputs is 2 to the power k. So these are the number of rows in the truth table when a Boolean function has k inputs. The vector of ordered binary output for all 2 to the power k inputs, which is this one, is also there. So the number of possible output vectors is 2 to the power 2 to the power k. That is easy to see. Let me just show here. So if you think of a 3 input Boolean functions, there are 8 rows in the truth table. And the output of each row could be 0 or 1. So the number of possible Boolean functions becomes 2 to the power 8. Okay, which is 2 to the power 2 to the power 3. So, but what then happens is that as you increase the number k, the number of possible Boolean functions explodes. So with k equal to 1, there are 4 possible functions. With 2, 16. But by the time you reach 5, you have more than 10 to the power 9 functions. Now, when you are trying to construct a Boolean model or fit data to a Boolean model, then you have to choose one amongst these 10 to the power 9, more than 10 to the power 9 functions if you have a gene with 5 regulators. So now, are all possible Boolean functions realized in the biological case, or certain Boolean functions are predominantly existing in the biological data set? That is one of the questions I want to address here. So these are the various representations of Boolean functions that I will use in this talk. One is, of course, the truth table that you can see, and all of you understand what the truth table is. What I wanted to mention is that there is another quantity I will use, which I will call as bias p of a truth table. Sorry, bias p of a Boolean function. So for this Boolean function, if you look at it, of the 8 rows that you have, there are 3 rows which have output as 1. So the bias p is basically the number of ones in the output vector of the truth table. And here the bias is 3, so it's an odd biased function. So all Boolean functions with a given number of inputs k can then be classified into either odd bias or even bias. And you can divide the 2 to the power 2 to the power k possible Boolean functions with k inputs, half into odd bias, half into even bias. A question I will ask also is that when we look at then the biologically realized Boolean functions in real data, are they equally divided between odd bias functions and even bias function, because they're equally probable in the complete set of possible Boolean functions if you choose at random. So you can also represent the Boolean expressions in terms of DNF and CNF. I won't go into the details here. And also one of the representations I will use in my work would be the Boolean hypercube. So since there are 8 rows here, each row can be represented as a point in the 3 cube. So this is the 3 cube. So there are 8 points, and we use two different colors to represent the output of each point here, or each vertex in the Boolean hypercube. So the vertices which are 0 are in blue, the vertices which are in red are in 1. So you can see the truth table correspondence to the Boolean hypercube. Okay, so some questions of interest. Let me reiterate these questions. So as I said, if there are k regulators to a function, there are 2 to the power 2 to the power k possible functions. Are all possible Boolean functions, that is 2 to the power 2 to the power k, equally probable in biological regulatory logic? So I need a data set to analyze that. I will present you the data set down the line. So this is one of the questions, key questions of interest to me in this talk. Further, are there certain classes of Boolean functions more biologically meaningful than others? That is, can we use certain constraints or some properties that we desire of Boolean functions which represent biological regulatory logic? Let me first attack the second question. So in this context, there are several biologically meaningful or relevant classes of Boolean functions which have been proposed. That is, you are now taking all 2 to the power 2 to the power k functions for k inputs and divided or finding a subset of them which have certain property of biological interest. And one basic property of biological interest, especially in gene regulation, for instance, is that if the presence or absence of a transcription factor, that is input, does not alter the rate of transcription of a gene, that is the state of the output, then it can be considered to be ineffective. So let me not take the formal definition of effectiveness. I mean, it's in the paper. So what I would argue is that Boolean functions which embody biological regulatory logic should satisfy the criterion of effective functions. So let me make it more explicit. So effective functions or effective Boolean function is one where all inputs to a gene must be effective to elicit a response from that gene. And an ineffective function will have at least one input, one of the k input, which elicits no response from the gene. So this is the example of an effective function. So you can check that if you change x1 from 0 to 1 and you ignore the state of the other two variables, x2 and x3, the other two inputs, then you can ensure, you can ascertain that at least in one case they will have a difference. So if you see here 0 gives 1, here 1 gives 0. So the change in x1 can at least have a change in one of the rows in the truth table. The other thing I can tell you is that the minimal expression for such a Boolean function will at least have appearance of each Boolean variable or literal at least once. So if you see, the function can be written in this form in the minimal expression. I don't have time, but we can prove that effective functions can have both even and odd bias. An ineffective function is one where the change in the state of one of the inputs, that is if x3 takes 0 or 1, that doesn't affect the state of the output. So let's look at this. So if you see, it's 0 0 0. So x2 and x3, let's fix to 0 0. So if you see 0 0 0 gives output as 1. Similarly, 1 0 0 also gives output as 0. Okay, but let's look at x3. So 0 0 0. So x3 is 0 here, the output is 1. So let's look at 0 0 1. So 0 0 1, still it's 1. So a change in x3, if you fix the x1 and x2, doesn't lead to a change in the output. And this is true for any combination, okay, for x1 and x2. So x3 is actually not effective. So actually the minimal expression for this Boolean function only involves two of the variables, and such functions are ineffective. So in the paper, we provide a proof that all ineffective Boolean functions happen to be even biased. That is, they will always have even number of ones in the output vector of the truth table. And as a corollary, if a Boolean function happens to be odd, that is, there are odd number of ones in the output vector, you are guaranteed to have it to be effective. That is, all inputs are effective. Although this is a very simple property, I don't think anybody has ever provided a proof for this. to the best of our knowledge, that all odd bias functions are effective, while all ineffective functions only have even bias. So a second property of interest is that of activation and repression. That is, we know typically in biology that the regulators of a gene either activate it or inhibit it. And such property, which is known as unateness in the terms of Boolean literature, needs to be also satisfied by the function. So we may know from experimental literature that this function, which depends on three inputs, x1, x2, and x3, x1 activates it, x2 inhibits it, x3 inhibits it. Now this activation and inhibition should be captured by the Boolean function. And there is a formal framework which one can use to figure out the subset of Boolean functions amongst the 2 to the power 2 to the power k, which provide you the following sign, which are assigned to the different edges. And one can then select those. And such functions are known as unate functions. That's another class of Boolean functions of interest to us. Okay, so let me just give you an example of a unate function and non-unate function. A unate function example is here. So if you see x1 represses the state of f. So if you see, typically when x1 is 1, the output is 0. Okay, but in at least one case when x1 is 0, that is, it is off, then the output is 1. So this is the kind of a unate function. Again, the formal definition and all, it will take me time to convey everything, but you can convince yourself that a subset of the functions 2 to the power 2 to the power k will satisfy this unateness property, while this is an example of a non-unate function. So if you write the Boolean function as an expression, unate functions will be of the type where each variable, that is x1, x2, or x3, only appears in one of the two forms of the literal. Okay, while in the case of non-unate functions, at least one of the variables will appear both as a positive or a negative literal. Here, if you look at it, x3 appears and x2 appears in both of their forms. So I don't have time here to convey this, but this is the property of a unate function. So two classes of functions I've already defined. One which is effective, second which is unate. Okay, these are both biologically meaningful. A third class of functions of interest is that of canalizing functions, and this is more proposed by Kaufman himself. Okay, this is a classic book by Kaufman in 1993, The Origins of Order. Many people in the area of complex systems have read this book and have been inspired by this. There are several key ideas in this book which people are still scratching. And there are several hypotheses which Kaufman has made, which needs quantitative treatment and sort of proof for it with real data. So in this book, Kaufman actually proposes a class of functions, Boolean functions, which is known as canalizing functions. And he named the word canalizing in the honor of the biologist Waddington, who is very famous. I don't go into the details. So the word canalizing was picked up from there. And I want to basically convey what canalizing functions are. And then there is a extension of the property of canalization to nested canalizing functions. Okay. So the canalizing function is of the following nature. If setting a particular input to a given value fixes the output of the function, then it is said to be a canalizing function. So for example, here, I fix x1 to 1, then the output is always 0, regardless of the values of x2 and x3. So this becomes a canalizing input. And a canalizing function is one where at least one of the inputs to the Boolean function is a canalizing one. So if you see here in the truth table, whenever x1 is 1, the output is 0, regardless of the values for x2 and x3. While these, when x1 is 0, it could take different values. So this x1 equal to 1 is the canalizing input, and f equal to 0 is the canalized output. So that's the class of canalizing functions. So what we can show is that the fraction of canalizing functions also diminishes as you increase the k amongst the all possible functions. So this idea was further extended to the property of nested canalizing, where each variable of the Boolean function satisfies the canalizing property in the following fashion. You can construct the nested canalizing function, and I would call them as NCF in this talk for short, as follows. So let's say you take the variable x1. And so what we decide is that when x1 is 0, the output is always fixed to 0. So regardless of the values of x2 and x3. So you can start writing the expression like that. Subsequently, you can have, when x2 is 0, the output is 1. So this becomes canalizing. Subsequently, when x3 is 1, the output is 0. So and that completes it. So basically, each variable of the function satisfies the canalizing property in a hierarchical fashion. And I don't have again time, which is mentioned in the paper, which will be that nested canalizing function. If you write the expression, it will have the following form, where there is a nestedness of the different variables. Also, each literal of the function appears in one of the types, positive or negative, and it appears in the following fashion. What we can show and we have proven in the paper is that NCFs always will have odd bias. So since they have odd bias, they are always effective as well. And further, these NCFs, that is nested canalizing functions, are guaranteed to be unit, that is, they are unit functions. So nested canalizing functions are a proper subset of effective functions and unit functions, and they lie in the odd bias category. So finally, a class of functions we take and explore in the paper is the concept of read-once functions. To the best of our knowledge, this has been there in the computer science literature, but has never been actually explored in detail in the biological literature, that is of the Boolean network models of biological systems. So a Boolean function is said to be read once if an input variable appears exactly once in its minimized Boolean expression. So the minimized Boolean expression will have exactly one instance of each thing. This is a function of 4 variables, and each variable appears exactly once in the expression. So I will refer to read once functions as ROFs. So these are ROFs. This is the ROF of 3 variables. This is the ROF of, this is the ROF of 4 variables. This is the ROF of 3 variables. This is a non-ROF, because if you see the minimal expression, the variable x2 and x3 appear twice. So I won't go into the details. We have for the first time explored if ROFs are sort of relevant in the space of Boolean models of biological networks. What we have also shown is that these ROFs, or read-once functions, always have odd bias. The nested canalizing functions, or NCFs, are a proper subset of read-once functions. That's very important. Further, all ROFs up to 3 inputs are NCFs. That is, if you have k equal to 3 or less, ROFs are always NCFs. ROFs which are not NCFs are first found at k equal to 4. So even if you didn't follow all that, let me try to give a visual illustration of how these functions exist in the complete space of Boolean functions. And this can be done exhaustively for all functions with k equal to 4 inputs. Okay, k equal to 4, you have 65,536 possible Boolean functions. So let me divide them. So I'll just take a 2D, visual representation. So if the space, of 65,536 functions are taken with k equal to 4 inputs, half of them have odd bias, half of them have even bias. That's very easy to show. Now let's look at the space of effective functions. As I said, all odd functions have to be effective. But there could be some ineffective functions, and there are, and they all happen to have even bias. So ineffective functions are sort of only in the even bias category. By the way, these sort of, this is not drawn to scale, but the sizes of each space is sort of in the same relative order as the actual size of each set in terms of the cardinality. Now, looking at the canalizing functions, just canalizing, where at least one of the 4 inputs is canalizing, they can be both even and odd. Okay. But if you take the class of unit functions, they can also be both even and odd. So if you look at it, some of the unit functions are also ineffective functions. Similarly, some of the canalizing functions can also be ineffective. But let's move on to read-once functions. Read-once functions, as I said, we can give a proof that they always have odd bias. So they completely are in the odd bias side of the functions. And further, the nested canalizing function is a subset of the ROF, or read once functions, and it's contained there. And it is contained also within the UF set and the CF set. So if you look at these set of NCFs, the functions which are nested canalizing functions, they are effective, they are unate, they are also read once. Okay, so they are satisfy many interesting properties. So this kind of sets, I'm sort of giving it away that this class of functions could be particularly important for the biological data set. So let's come to the main question, because I had to give the theoretical background. Are certain classes of Boolean functions overrepresented in the Boolean models of reconstructed biological networks? This is the question. I mean, I want to connect this to data. That's what we do. So, so how do we go about it? So what has happened is that in the last 25 years or so, many people have constructed Boolean models for various biological systems. So these are some examples. So this is the example in plants. So where you know they are studying flower development in Arabidopsis, a gene regulatory network, and this is a real network which people have constructed. So you have both the graph, the directed graph, and from the experiments inferred regulatory logic or Boolean functions for each node. So we have collected all such models which have been constructed to date. So I won't go into the details, but you can basically gather all the models which have been constructed to date in published literature for real biological system and take the functions there. So in short, what we have is that we compile a list of 88 models of different biological systems which have been constructed to date. They cover from cancer to plants, okay? They also cover bacteria, okay? They cover across different kingdoms, species, and different cellular processes. So one of the earliest model in our collection is from 2006. The latest is from 2020. The number of nodes in different networks which have been constructed can vary from 4 to 128. So I won't go into the details. So here, you know, various manual curators or the people who have built the model, they have gone into detail to the experimental facts and tried to construct the Boolean function for each node such that it sort of embodies the real regulation which is occurring in the organism. So from these 88 models, which we could get 2687 Boolean functions, okay, which basically sort of we consider as our empirical or biological data set. Now we could ask, are different types of functions that we discussed, are they overrepresented in this set of functions in the actual biology, or it is just a random draw from all possible Boolean functions? That is what we do. So the first question we ask is that, is it equally probable to have odd biased functions and even biased function in the real data set? So there's a surprise. So I divide the different 2687 functions into functions with different number of inputs. That is, you know, how many inputs were there to different genes. As you can see, regardless of the number of inputs there are, overwhelming majority, if not all of them, are odd biased. Very rare certain functions are even biased. But if you were to randomly choose a Boolean function for a given k, you would, half of them will be odd, half of them will be even. And this is very different from that. Okay. So somehow the real biology goes for odd biased functions. I don't think anybody has made this observation. It's a simple observation, but nobody has made this to the best of my knowledge. Furthermore, I don't have details. I have checked for each of the different classes we considered: effective functions, unate functions, canalizing functions, read once functions, nested canalizing functions, which is a proper subset of read once functions, and the non-NCF RFs, that is the RFs which are not NCFs. What I can tell you is that each of these sets are, except the effective functions, are overrepresented in the real data set. And furthermore, we have developed a statistical test such that we can check for relative enrichment, which is mentioned in the paper. For example, you could say that since unate functions are overrepresented, that explains the representation of nested canalizing functions, because this is a proper set of unate functions. But that's not true. What we find is that just unateness as a property is not able to explain the enrichment of nested canalizing functions. So there must be some special property associated with nested canalizing function beyond its effectiveness and unateness, and even the property of ROF, meaning ROF, which explains its enrichment in the biological data set. So I won't go into the details, it's mentioned in the paper. So these classes of functions are overrepresented, in particular the read once functions and its subset nested canalizing functions. So I am coming to the main message of the paper. So then we wondered, is there anything special about the complexity of these Boolean functions which are overrepresented in the empirical data set? Let me just repeat. We find that these nested canalizing functions and read once functions are overrepresented in real biological logic. So is there anything special about these classes of functions in terms of their complexity, which explains their overrepresentation in the empirical data set? So for that, we choose two measures of complexity to quantify each Boolean function. One which is been studied a lot in biological literature, in particular, the notion of average sensitivity. Average sensitivity is, of course, a well-known measure for robustness of Boolean functions to perturbations. And actually, the sensitivity is defined for each node. So essentially, the sensitivity for a node is defined as the number of neighbors on the Boolean hypercube for that vertex or node, which has a different output value than its own. So if you look at this, it is 1, 0, 0. The output is 0. So it has three neighbors, 1, 2, and 3. And two of its neighbor have a different value from its own value. So the sensitivity is 2. So you can compute the sensitivity of each node or each row in the truth table in the following fashion. And you can sum them up over the 8 vertices of this 3 cube or 8 rows of the truth table, and you get the sum. That is the total sensitivity. And then you can take an average over the rows. So there are 8 rows. So it's 14 by 8 equal to 1.75. This is a very interesting property, and it's a measure also of the complexity of the Boolean function in the literature on computer science literature. I don't have details to go into it. So this property has been studied a lot. So we use one of the measures we use to quantify the complexity of functions is the average sensitivity. The second measure actually we use is, I don't think has ever been explored in the biological science literature, is the notion of Boolean complexity. And it has been actually proposed by Feldman. It goes back to some notions in switching function theory. I don't have details to go into here, but basically the Boolean complexity of a function is the number of literals in the minimal equivalent Boolean expression obtained by factorization of a Boolean expression. Let me just say that when as k increases, that is the number of inputs increases for a Boolean function, getting the minimal expression is not easy. You have to sort of approximate a minimal expression, and that is what we do. Again, it's mentioned in the paper how we do that. But let's say you had the minimal expression. For example, for this function, you see the DNF form, we could simplify it to the following expression. So the number of literals that appears in the minimal expression is exactly 3. x1, x2, x3. So the Boolean complexity of this expression is 3. So this is another measure that we use in terms of string lengths, if I say so, of the minimal expression to quantify the complexity of Boolean functions. Now we use these two measures to basically check which functions are likely to be less complex and which are likely to be more complex. So then an interesting question would be, what class of Boolean function minimizes both the Boolean complexity and the average sensitivity? So I will try to first present a computational result, okay? And this computational result, which is in this 3-dimensional figure, actually led us to conjecture something. And I don't have time to go into the details, but we are able to give a theoretical proof of that conjecture, okay, in the paper. And the theoretical proof will require me to just recast the problem into another problem in computer science, which has been solved by different people in different contexts. So here what I do is that I take all functions with k equal to 4 inputs, like that 2-dimensional figure I showed, where we were looking at the overlaps. And I divide them based on, I classify them based on 3 quantities. One, the bias, that is the number of ones in the output vector of the truth table. Second, the Boolean complexity that we approximate. And third, the average sensitivity. So remember, the nested canalizing functions and the read once functions, the NCFs and the ROFs, they always have odd bias. So they will have bias 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So there will be no NCFs and ROFs for bias 2, 4, 6, 8. So I'm not showing the bias above 8 because I don't have time, but there's a complementarity property. That is, a function in bias p will have a complementary function in bias 2 to the power k minus p. It can be easily proven. So what you should see is that, so the minimum Boolean complexity for an effective function, an effective function is one which will have all inputs effective. So each input has to appear at least once in the minimal expression. So the minimum Boolean complexity is 4. So this line, which I showed here, is the line for the minimal Boolean complexity. And if you look at it, the the NCFs have the minimum Boolean complexity, and also the ROFs have the minimum Boolean complexity at all the odd biases. But if you look at the average sensitivity, okay, there you see that, for example, here the NCF is the triangle, while the non-NCF ROF is the square. So if you look at it here, for example, 5, okay, or 7. So the NCF has less average sensitivity because it is below than the square. So what we find is that, and we further study that, the average sensitivity and the bias, and what we find is that for a given number of input k and bias p, this suggests that the NCFs have the globally minimum average sensitivity. Because ROFs and NCFs are same in terms of Boolean complexity, but NCFs, which is a subset of ROFs, further reduces even the other measure of Boolean complexity which we study, which is the average sensitivity. So we conjectured that, and I won't go into the details, but we had to give a proof. So what we wanted to prove is that in any KP set, that is, you fix the K, which is 4 inputs, and P, which is the bias P is odd, Boolean functions having the minimum average sensitivity. Which Boolean functions have the minimum average sensitivity? So I don't have time, but one can recast the problem into the problem on the hypercube such that you want to put P points such that, so you have P points as 1, so you have 2 to the power K minus P points as 0. So you have 2 to the power K points here. Okay, so you have to divide them into the 0 set and the 1 set, and then you can, this E01 basically tells you the number of edges between the two different colors of vertices, and that is basically 2 times that is the total sensitivity. And based on this reformulation, if you want to minimize the average sensitivity, you basically want to minimize the number of edges between these two colors of vertices. And actually, this problem, when you recast this problem, has been solved by many people in computer science in many different contexts. But we use the proof of Hart, which is published in this 1976 paper, where he gives the arrangement of P points on the hypercube such that you will have the minimum number of edges between the two colors. I won't go into the details because I'm almost running out of the time. This is the Hart's construction, which he defines in this 1976 paper, what would be a good set which will achieve this minimization. Okay, and what we are able to do is the following in the paper. So what the first thing to remember is that minimizing this quantity E01 is equivalent to minimizing the total or average sensitivity, because average sensitivity is just a normalization of the total sensitivity. Hart's work already gives the arrangement of P points on a hypercube such that one obtains the minimum value of E01 and thus the average sensitivity. And we use these Hart's results to further show that a Boolean function constructed from a good set of an odd number of P vertices is exactly equivalent to nested canalizing function. So this is a proof which is given in the paper. And further, we show that a Boolean function constructed from a good set of an even number of vertices, that can never be NCF, is actually an ineffective Boolean function. So if you had even bias and you wanted to minimize average sensitivity, you will have an ineffective function that is not biologically meaningful. So I won't go into the Hart's construction here. I can even share the slides happily with everybody if whoever is interested. This is a visual proof where we actually show the equivalence of the good set of Hart with odd number of vertices to actually nested canalizing functions. We are able to also give a theoretical proof in the paper. So let me just try to quickly summarize what I have to tell you. The nested canalizing functions for a given number of inputs k and bias p have the minimum complexity in terms of two notions. So why is this important? Because these class of functions and also the read ones functions are overrepresented in the biological data set than would be expected at random. It is, and they also function form a tiny space of the whole space of functions. So to give it, this gives further possible justification for the overrepresentation in empirical data set that they minimize two notions of complexity. I was also able to show some very interesting but simple properties, simple but interesting properties. All ineffective Boolean functions are even bias. All odd bias Boolean functions are effective. Any given for any given k, if p equal to odd set. Sorry, there's a typo here. The NCFs have globally minimum average sensitivity. So I also showed that the odd function seems to be overwhelmingly overrepresented compared to even functions in the biological data set. For any given k, p even, the set of functions with minimum average sensitivity are ineffective. For any given k among the effective functions, ROF and therefore NCFs have the least Boolean complexity. So this actually sort of our work supports and formalizes what Kaufman had made a qualitative view in his paper, in his book in 1993. So our work basically supports and formalizes Kaufman's qualitative view in which simplicity should be a driver of regulatory logic in biological systems. That is, the functions that are realized in the biological models, they are simple, that is, they are least complex. They are least complex in terms of both the notion of average sensitivity and Boolean complexity. Now you would say, okay, all this is theoretical. How could that have implication in the modeling moving forward? So I again will point to this paper which I led during my postdoctoral work, where I take a very simple 5-gene model and I take some real constraints and try to infer the functions given a network structure. What I was able to show is that even for the simple models, the number of possible combinations of Boolean functions which could actually satisfy the dynamical constraints is pretty large. Okay, so there were actually more than 1 million combinations of Boolean functions which could actually satisfy the dynamical constraints. But if you limit to the class of nested canalizing functions or NCFs, then you are able to hugely reduce the space of, or the search space or the space of possible models that satisfy your data. So you go from million to less than 10,000. So that's 2 orders of magnitude you at least gain. Actually 3 orders of magnitude. So so our results could have implication while constructing Boolean network models of biological systems with novel constraints linked to experimental data. Also, there are some dynamical consequences of these observations. One of the dynamical consequences I want to just point out is that Kaufman and others, even there is a result in our paper, suggests that if you were to invest in these nested canalizing functions, then actually the dynamics, which we didn't talk about at all in this work, can be more ordered rather than being chaotic. I won't go into the details here. So with that, I would just like to thank all the people, my students, and the range of collaborators who work with me on different topics. Yeah, for their help, because I think these things are very related. Although I work on one problem with one person, I always get influenced by discussions with others. This work was not funded in particular by any grant, but my lab has been quite fortunate, and I thank all the funders who have funded over the last 7 years my lab, and thank you for the support. And I'm sorry I went a bit ahead more than my allocated time, but if there is any time, I would be happy to answer questions. And I know I have gone fast with the various things, so I would be happy to clarify things and actually simplify, if possible, the main message of this talk to anybody who is interested. Thank you, Jaya, for this opportunity, and thank you all for listening to me.
Definitely, Arijit. Thank you so much. Big hand of applause for the wonderful talk. Yeah, the floor is open for questions. So if anybody wants to, it's a small group here. So if you want to unmute and ask, please go ahead. So meanwhile, I'll ask a few questions to Arijit. I am quite curious about how this will work with real data sets. So this is more of an empirical thing, right? So I mean, for starters, what do you mean by a gene being on or off? How do you quantify that?
Ah, so people basically, try to discretize the expression data set, let's say microarray or RNA-seq, and then decide on a one or off. But it is not always possible to discretize.
Exactly.
So you take a discrete sort of a discrete approximation and decide if the gene is on or off. And similarly, you sort of approximate the regulation through a Boolean function. That may not always work also.
Okay.
And
So what quantity do
that
you
is done
measure?
in all of these models. Actually, I didn't show you the details, but each model here, say, this is a real gene, right? You see activation and inhibition. So here in this model, like E2A, it has a function associated with it, which is a Boolean function of all the inputs.
Mhm.
That is what people have done. So this was done in 88 different models. So we took all those models and the functions, and that is my empirical data set, which I
Okay.
analyze.
So here you have an activation value, some kind of value that measures the activation of the gene. Is that right? And then you have a threshold which decides if it is on or off. Is it? Or...
So you know from experiments that, so let's say this ID2 is repressing E2A. Okay. So you know from experiments that ID2 represses E2A.
Mhm.
It could be a low throughput experiment or a high throughput experiment.
Okay.
And this feature will be captured by the function which will be assigned to E2A.
Okay. So it's a property of the gene itself, not the property of the gene and some other. I mean, it's not a binary function. It's a
No.
unity function.
It's a property of the regulatory region of the gene.
Okay.
It's a property of how the gene is controlled by other genes.
Okay. How the gene is controlled by other genes.
So
Okay.
when you look at the network, you as a graph, you see that many things, lot of, you are just looking at the edges. So let's look at
Mhm.
it here. So the thing is that in the Boolean framework, to play the dynamics, it is not
Mhm.
good enough to say that, for example, if you can see here, there are 4 edges sort of,
Mhm.
ending here, right? At
Mhm.
LYF1. But to
Mhm.
play the dynamics, you actually write a rule based on a function, which is a 4-input function.
Okay.
So that's assigned in this model. So that's a much more sort of intricate level of work to reconstruct such networks, because you
Okay.
just don't have the connections but also have the update rules. And
Okay.
this work is about studying those update rules, which captures how the gene is controlled by its regulators.
Okay. Okay. So you mentioned that there are these models which are available already, and then you took an empirical model with these existing models. How did
Yeah.
that?
So we basically, there are 88 papers which have been published to date of this,
Okay.
which I think exhaust most of what has been published of this type.
Mm-hmm.
We took all of them and we have curated the data and cleaned it up and took all the functions from there.
Okay.
So the GitHub repository associated with this paper gives those functions away and all the models and everything.
Okay. Okay. So the network that you have in the GitHub repository is the Boolean network.
No, so
That's
we don't have the model. So see, the point is that each model is, so each model so for example, this is one model.
mm-hmm.
Okay? So it may have maybe 20 genes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in this work, we are only interested in the update rule, which is assigned to each node.
Okay.
So
Okay.
what we do is that we just take out the update rule from this model and just make a collection of update rules
Okay.
across all the models,
Okay.
because then there is no bias. These are, so some model is for plants, some is for cancer, some is for bacteria, whatever. So we look
Okay.
at update rules regardless of that.
Okay, so it is somewhat agnostic to the genes that you are working with, right? So the update model is what uh, that. So when you say update model, so there is a notion of something changing over time. Is
Yes.
it changing over time or changing over some kind of function or what change?
So the state of each node changes over time, because it is dependent on the state of the input nodes.
Okay.
So again, let's go to that.
Mm.
Uh,
So essentially, you took this 88 models, looked at this Boolean modeling of that, and then you checked what were the updates that happened in that particular model itself, and then just extracted that alone. Is that right?
Um, no, so I'm taking the Boolean models which have been constructed, okay,
Okay,
to date,
Boolean models themselves. Okay,
okay, and then I'm taking all the functions across those models,
okay,
okay, and I'm looking at what is special about those functions or update rules.
okay,
That is here. I mean, the main thing, I know it becomes a bit. So the main thing which you have to remember is that with 3 inputs, you have 256 different functions.
right.
Now, the main question I'm asking is, are all 256 present in the real data?
Right. So you're checking if, say, if there are three genes, then are all these states and the combination of states available in all the different models that you have in the 88 models? Right?
The combination of states is not important. Are the different 256 different Boolean functions represented or not? The answer is no.
Yeah,
So,
that is
so it is only a specific type of functions which are overrepresented,
okay. Okay.
and that is a very small set of the 256. That is very important point. I'm sorry, I actually missed one slide. So this is actually the main figure to understand. So this is sort of a visual representation. You have the complete space represented as a rectangle, you see, and you see the space of functions which actually are really represented is the NCF space, and that is also not drawn to scale. It is much smaller than the size that you see here. If you were to take the ratio of the size, the area of this to the whole area of the rectangle.
Okay.
So what this means is that when you are trying to, so when you are trying to build a dynamical model, and it is not always possible to build a differential equation model. For simplicity, the data may be more conducive to do Boolean modeling, which is qualitative dynamics. Then you have to choose a function or assign a function to the node or to each gene in your model. Then how do you choose the model? Sorry, choose the function. You have a huge possibility.
Mhm.
But what this result is showing is that only a very few fraction of the functions which satisfy some of the very biologically meaningful properties are actually seen in reality.
Okay.
You can ignore the complete large space of functions, and that is very important because, as I mentioned, with 5 inputs already you have a huge number of functions.
Right. Right. So this NCF that you're talking about here, that is the subset that is of interest, right? Then you're talking about.
I think both read-once functions and NCFs are of interest, but NCFs are of particular interest. We find for some reason that almost every function which is assigned, that may be slightly over-representation, but almost every function is an NCF.
Okay. So this NCF that you showed in that diagram, not all of the NCF that is possible, say for 5 genes or 6 genes. So you will have some number of functions that will satisfy that, right? Not all of them would occur in biology as well, right? Isn't that the understanding?
A good question. So, a further, so actually, the further characterization of the NCF can be based on these biases. That is, so there is one NCF, but actually there are a number of NCFs which are possible for each of the odd bias. So, so let's look at it this way. So if you have a 4-input function, the truth table will have how many rows? 2 to the power 4, that is 16 rows, right? So the number of ones in the truth table can be between 0 and 16. Okay, it can be 0 or 16. Basically, all odd bias, that is the number of ones in the truth table, is the bias. So what I am trying to tell you is that whenever the number of ones is odd, okay, there is at least one NCF. And actually, I didn't tell you the isomorphism part. So that is what is that there is one function, maybe that slide I can pull out. So the point is that, yeah, so the point is that, so you have these literals, okay? You can do permutations and permutations of those literals and also change positive to negative. And that's basically also another function. So, so it's not just one function. So that figure, 3D figure also has the number of isomorphisms plotted
Oh,
here.
right.
So for example, here, this is like 8.
Mm.
Okay. So you have a very interesting question that, so there is a NCF here, there is an NCF here, but is this more overrepresented in the real data than this? Actually, in an unpublished paper, we have an answer to that.
Mm.
So there are, it is possible that even within NCFs, there could be certain NCFs which may be overrepresented.
Okay. Okay.
And that could lead, that could be explained maybe by veto power of some inputs over other inputs.
Right.
Like, you know, you can imagine like this. So for example, let's say there is a decision-making committee, okay? And if your director is there, and if your director says something, then regardless of what others say, doesn't matter, right? So, so that could also happen in actual regulation in biology. One input could have a veto over other inputs.
Okay.
But this is very computer sciencey, by the way.
Right, right. I understand that. I mean, yeah, that's the thing, right? Computer science can propose a model, but only subset of that model will be actually useful in biology, right? So usually, right? Because the idea is this is like the entire space that you can cover, right? I mean, this is all the possibilities, but not all possibilities have to occur in nature, right? So that would be the.
There are some questions actually in the chat. Can I take them? So there's one question by Dibakar, right?
Mm. Yeah, you can take that question. In non-NCF ROF versus number of input graphs, would it saturate as K is increased?
So I think I get the question. So so actually what we find, Dibakar, is that as K increases, the fraction of, so this is there in the paper actually as a supplementary table. So you are welcome to look at it. So so you can say, so you can ask the following, that what fraction of ROFs is NCF, what fraction is non-NCF ROF. As K increases, actually, the fraction of non-NCF ROFs increases. We have some understanding of it. But what we find is that since the real data we have is only till K equal to 14, and that to very few, really we can do much for K equal to 8. Typically, NCFs are overrepresented. Non-NCF ROFs maybe are rare in the real data set. But the fraction of non-NCF ROFs versus NCFs increases within the ROFs as K increases. That is something we have shown in the paper. Up to K equal to 10, which is a big number. So, for example, we also have in the GitHub and the paper a nice algorithm of, if you give me a random Boolean function with some K inputs, let's say K up to 10 or 12, we have a simple algorithm to tell you if it is a ROF or not, if it is a NCF or not. That is easy. NCF or not is easy, but is it a ROF and is it a non-NCF ROF or not? It's a slightly tricky question, but we have presented a code for that to do that as well.
He has a follow-up question.
Yeah. If the NCF ROF subset dominates, then how does this bring diversity to gene interactions? Okay. See, within the NCFs, so see, okay, good question. Very nice. Okay, so let's understand this as follows. How I, let me just go to the last slide. See, the ROF minimizes one complexity measure, which is Boolean complexity. So all ROFs, that is NCF and non-NCF ROFs with K inputs, are at equal footing if you were to take the Boolean complexity as a measure. Okay, this is explained in detail in the paper. But the NCF, in addition, actually minimizes another measure, which is the average sensitivity. So it has minimum average sensitivity, so maximum robustness to noise, if I say so. So while you may require diversity of gene interactions, and the diversity of genetic interactions could be in terms of the number of activators and inhibitors, that diversity you can maintain within the NCF set itself. But if you desire to be more robust, then you want to minimize the complexity in terms of average sensitivity. So you may go and select for average NCFs. And you should remember that not every function that we have taken is also always NCF. There are exceptions too. So that is the best answer I could give today. So you are actually maximizing your robustness and minimizing your complexity, and you arrive at NCFs. But you can have still different combinations of activators and inhibitors within the set of NCFs. That's not a problem.
Prasanna has an interesting question for you. Can any of these techniques predict COVID mutants?
No. So, but these techniques are more towards building models of gene regulatory networks. These are more. See, you need a Boolean model. That is, you need a Boolean update rule, okay, which determines the dynamics of the model, and we are looking at those update rules. I don't think, in particular, predict COVID mutants.
Thank you, Arijit. Yes,
Thank you.
interesting work. So we wish you the best in getting this published soon, so we can read the interesting research that you have gotten. But again, it's quite yeah. I welcome everybody to read the paper. I guess computer scientists can definitely read this paper, right? So
I mean, it's written for a general audience, so I think it's not a difficult paper to read. I mean, it takes some time to assimilate things, but the preprint is good to read because typically journals ask you to reduce and put things into supplementary material. So the preprint actually, we wanted the preprint to basically cover every theoretical aspect in detail, as pedagogical as possible. So I would recommend the preprint to be read actually. That's better and easy to understand.
I had one more question. So you had mentioned about using the Hart's rule or something for.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with that? I mean, as a solution to your problem?
No, I mean, I didn't know this. So I could easily recast the problem. I mean, I'm not a mathematician. I mean, I could recast the problem into the hypercube, but then I said, okay, this must have been solved. And this is quite related to Howlin's sensitivity conjecture in combinatorics, which is one of the really interesting problems in combinatorics which have been solved in the last few years. So I said it must have been solved. So my student kept looking at papers and he got a paper where Hart had solved it. But again, Hart is not the only one who has solved it.
Okay.
Many other contexts, the same problem has been solved. The question of putting the dots on the hypercube, it's a very interesting computational problem. So the only thing we needed to do is that we had to show that the Hart's arrangement is equivalent to the NCF. That we show in our paper. But I must say that there is something funny which has happened. I gave this talk before once in IIT Madras in a conference. After that, a paper came out, which was sort of not all with all the details in arXiv. And they basically copy Hart's thing. I mean, it's a preprint without mentioning Hart or anybody else. So that's very funny. So no credit has been given to Hart.
Oh, that's
so that's very terrible, actually.
Yeah.
So actually, we didn't need to solve that. It is a very interesting problem actually, which has been solved. Hart is actually a mathematician and works on game theory and many things in Hebrew University. My student has corresponded with him. He's been very generous in the correspondences. But I think it's a beautiful proof. But there are alternate proofs available in the computer science literature of the same thing. But nobody has proven that this arrangement, which leads to minimization of the links between the two sets, zeros and ones, is equivalent to the NCF. That is our observation.
Yeah. The reason I asked is because you were doing this modeling part, and then suddenly you said like this is the solution that is existing like in math, right? So I was wondering how you connected the dots. So that must have been a very exciting journey in itself, right?
Yeah, so for fun's sake, you should know that Olivier Martin, who is my postdoctoral mentor, who's a collaborator here, he wrote actually one of the initial papers with Stefan Wolfram, who basically developed Mathematica in cellular automata. Exactly. So he is very mathematical. So
Thank
He
you.
pushes us towards mathematical. So he's a physicist, but at the interface of physics and computer science has done very important works. So he pushes us to be extra mathematical, if I say so. But there are other questions one could attack, but it's not in the sort of framework of computational biology per se every day. So
Sure, sure. Very interesting work.
thank you,
Yeah,
Jaya.
so I think, yeah, we'll close the talk. Thank you for patiently answering all the questions as well. It was really nice of you.
No, I
So,
will be happy to answer. No problem. Anytime, if there are more questions, please drop me an email. I'll be happy to share with anybody.
yeah,
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's really nice interacting with all of you.
sure, sure. We're happy to have you here and look for more opportunities like this. So, thank you again, Arjit, and
Thank
have a good
you.
day. Yeah, we'll close the
Bye.
talk. Thank you, everybody, for attending the talk as well.
Bye.
Bye.